Well, I seem to get a lot of interest when I do a YouTube video about something electrical. And I realize it seems awfully overwhelming, so I try to break this up into small snippets so that it doesn't get confusing. And hopefully somehow it ends up being helpful, so if you have a problem, you don't feel totally intimidated about even trying to figure out what's wrong. So we're going to start today with the old instrument cluster again, like this. And we have gauges obviously here that all have on the back side. On this particular one, they have studs that stick out where wires attached to them. But you'll also notice there are holes here that are for lights and for other units. So one of the things that I do, if I want to figure out what that one is for, I use my flashlight, stick it up there, and then come back around. Oh, look, that's the one that you use for the high beam, low beam. So let's go see what this one is. And it's an illumination light. You probably can't see it very well, but it lights up this side over here. And this one is a turn signal light. There's the other turn signal light. Now what are these for? What's this one do? Well, that one is the illumination bulb. So now what we figured out here is we have one for the high beam, low beam, and these two are for the turn signals right and left, which these two right here, excuse me, which leaves three to illuminate at night so that you can see what's going on in here. So that's really helpful right there. You already know what all those are for, and if something's not working, you know exactly which one to go to figure out where you need to be working. So now if you want to get this out from under your dash, so this one came out of a Bronco, that you'll see that it has 4 mounting screws right here that hold it in, right here, 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 and it sticks through the dash. And I'm thinking that probably on that particular dash, the screws are visible from the outside. So it would come in from the back side and you would just remove it. It's going to obviously have the wires hooked up to it. So you'll have to kind of free all that up so that you can work on it. And you also want to mark all these wires so you don't get confused when you're putting it back and the gas gauge starts reading like the oil gauge and vice versa. So here's some of the tips that I wanted to pass along. So here's would be a typical wiring harness that would end up attaching inside of here. And here are the bulbs that we talked about that would illuminate the dash. This came out of a different vehicle, by the way. This came out of an old Fairlane instead of a Bronco, but it's the same thing. Here's the main harness connector right here that has all these different wires, and that's very helpful because they're all in different colors, so you can trace them back to this to figure out what they do. And this looks to me like this is a ground right here. See where you get a bunch of the black wires, which are usually for a ground, would attach here. So now we're just trying to figure out maybe something to do with the bulb, and we want to trace out a circuit. That's what I'm really trying to show here. So I found one that had 2 wires, and you'll notice too that there are some here that have just 1 wire. So that's going to be the power wire, and right here where it connects with these expansion fingers is where the ground's going to be. So you need to know that in order to make that work, if I simply take here and peel away some wires, if I don't cut my finger off doing that, and you can see I've buried the wire here so we can see it a little bit. And this is my power probe. Remember, I've shown these before. They actually provide power for testing. And here it would be the ground side of it, this little one right here. And I'm going to put it on this right here. So now we know we've got a ground. Let's see if this bulb will light up if we put power there. So I'm going to push the button on this. Once I touch that wire right there, and you can see that it works. So we know that bulb's good. We know this socket's good. We know that it'll work if it's grounded appropriately. So that's one thing that you can do, just to go through and test. Now, what's the advantage of all this? Well, you can trace these wires back down all the way back to here to see if you have a good connection and if you have power. So for instance, let's say you know that one of these bulbs is the bulb that powers up and lights up the dash. Then you would trace that wire all the way back. And this gets to be a little confusing, but don't let it get you down. And we come in here and we find these black wires, like this one as an example. It has a power and a ground. So the black wire is most likely the ground, and the gray wire is most likely the power. And you may have to take your razor blade and take this and open it up so you can see where these wires go. So we're going to pull that off and just see if we can figure out where it ends up over here. So that one's off, and let's take this one off. Now we're getting somewhere. We're going to be able to see where all these wires go to this main connector. So now let's start back here again with this one. And looky there, that silly thing turned into a combination of an orange wire and an orange and black wire. So we better see which one goes where. We're going to take this off to see that. So we can, okay, now we know that the gray wire probably is the wire that's going to line it up with power, and the orange and black wire is going to be the wire that grounds it looks like. And you can see that it comes through here. One more of these to remove. And right here we're going to remove one. Not as complicated as you think, is it? It just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of patience to follow these wires out so you can figure out what your problem might be. Yeah, that looks like a bunch of a mess there, but it's real easy at this point. Now we're going to go back to that bulb that we bared out, and we can find out that the two wires that we wanted to follow go up in here. And there's the orange and black wire. And the other one we found out to be was a orange wire, and we're going to follow it. So here's the two wires right there. And all you have to do now is connect them to, you can see they go in right here in this connector, and we're going to be looking for a ground on one of them, and we're going to look for power on the other one. And that's how we check that circuit out to see what's going on. Now, if that doesn't work on the other end, then we know what that traces back to, whether it's the light switch or the turn signals, whatever it goes back to. We know we have to have power and ground on each side. And you just simply use this to check that out. Turn on the lights, turn on the turn signals, turn on whatever it is that you're trying to check. Use your power probe and see if you have power there. So that's a good example of how you can follow this out. And basically, it's not really that much of a mystery. It's just that you always have to remember that you have power and ground when you're working on electricity in a car or anything for that matter. And you got to make sure it's a good ground. So one of the things that I always like to do is I always like to take my power probe back to the battery ground. So I know that's the perfect ground. I don't have to be wondering whether I have a good ground on this. And then this would go to the battery too for the power. And if we're using a test light, then we're going to take a jumper wire and take the test light back to the battery. So we're checking for power. We know that if we find something that lights up, that it's going to work because we've got a good ground on our test light. So any of these that you check out for lighting, you can go back through this. Now, what about the gauges? Well, each one of these gauges has its own set of wiring, and basically what that is you'll find, like on this wiring harness, see these connectors right here. We know that these are going to end up attaching to the gauge somewhere, whichever. And I didn't this, like I said, this doesn't line up with this one, but assuming that it goes like this on this particular gauge, and this is the fuel gauge. That's the one usually I get the most questions about. So we're going to have on most of these cars, we're going to have a voltage regulator that's going to cut the voltage down from battery voltage. So you check to see if it's got battery voltage. Then out of that, it's going to come into each side of the gauges. So there'll be inlet and then outlet. And when you check here, you're going to have 6 to 9 volts with the key on. Then you need to take your voltmeter, or you can take your power probe and you can check to see what the voltage is here, and then make sure it's coming back out of the gauge at the same rate. Then go to the back where it comes out at the gas tank or at the oil sender or at the temperature sender, and make sure you have that same power reading there. If you do, then you ground the wire on this side at somewhere on the car, and the gauge should move. And that would test the gauge out. If the gauge works and the power is there, then it's probably the sending unit that's on the car for the gas tank, the oil sender, or the temperature sender. These are real easy to check out. Just make sure you have power going in, power going out. Go out to the center and see if you got power at that point, then ground it and see if it works. Most of the time that's done with the key on. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. I know these are confusing, but each little step that you make to try to figure this out will make you a better electrician, make you feel a little bit more at ease about checking stuff out. Don't forget the fuse box. That's always a good place to start. If you're having a problem, make sure all the fuses are clean. Check both sides of the fuse with your voltmeter to make sure that it's working. Now, the last step is, these went away for a while, or not for a while, they just went away, and they were replaced by this. So you might find this on the back of your instrument cluster, and this is called a printed circuit board. So they simplified to get rid of this and replace it with this, and it does exactly the same thing. So you'll notice that right here is where it plugs in. So this plug right here would have plugged in here, and all you need to do is identify each of the lights like I showed you with your flashlight, then follow the little line over to that, like right here, and see if there's voltage there. If there's voltage there, and there's a ground on the other side, then you know it's not the printed circuit board. But if there's no voltage there and there is a ground and there's voltage back here, then probably something in this printed circuit board is bad and you'll need to replace it. Luckily, they have these nowadays for just about all the classic cars. You should be able to buy it. It's easy to put on, and it's easy to fix your problem if you find out that being what's causing it not to light up or not work. Excuse me. I'm Barry Wilson with Wilson Auto Repair. I hope this is helpful. Have a Merry Christmas. Hope you learn how to fix your car by yourself.